What if the people sworn to protect you were the ones who let you down? In a small town where racism has been a persistent issue, with over 20% of residents reporting racial profiling by law enforcement, a shocking tragedy unfolded. The sheriff's own daughter lost her life because his subordinates, driven by racial bias, stopped the best doctor from treating her. This heartbreaking story raises tough questions about trust and justice. As we delve into this true crime case, we invite you to share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. The Sheriff's Department has faced criticism for racial disparities, with African American residents being 3 times more likely to be stopped by police. How can such systemic issues be addressed? Let's explore this tragic event and its aftermath, and we'll be right there with you in the comments to discuss your insights. If you are enjoying this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, literally anywhere in the world. Also, hit that subscribe button to stay updated, and drop your thoughts below. Your voice matters. Thanks for being here. As the investigation into the sheriff's daughter's death began, it became clear that racial bias had played a devastating role. The doctor who was stopped, Dr. Maya Thompson, was a renowned specialist in emergency medicine. She had been on her way to the hospital when she was pulled over by the sheriff's deputies. Despite explaining the urgency of the situation, Dr. Maya Thompson was detained for over 20 minutes, a delay that proved fatal for the sheriff's daughter. The community was shocked and outraged by the news. Many residents had long complained about racial profiling by the local police, but this incident was particularly egregious. It highlighted a systemic problem that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Statistics showed that African American drivers were more than twice as likely to be stopped by police in this area compared to white drivers. This wasn't just a matter of numbers. It was about lives lost and families torn apart. The sheriff, who had always prided himself on being a fair and just leader, was faced with an unimaginable personal tragedy. He had to confront the fact that his own team had contributed to his daughter's death. This internal conflict was evident as he spoke publicly about the incident, expressing both grief and a deep sense of responsibility. He vowed to take immediate action to address the racial biases within his department, but many wondered if it was too little, too late. As the investigation progressed, it revealed a culture of racism that went beyond just a few rogue officers. There were stories of other incidents where racial bias had influenced police actions, often with severe consequences. The community demanded change, calling for reforms that would ensure such tragedies never happened again. They wanted accountability, not just for the officers involved but for the entire system that allowed this to occur. The case sparked a national conversation about racism in law enforcement and the need for systemic reform. Experts pointed out that addressing these issues required more than just disciplinary actions. It demanded a fundamental shift in how police departments were trained and held accountable. The sheriff's daughter's death became a catalyst for change, but the journey ahead would be long and difficult. Now, we want to hear from you. What do you think needs to be done to prevent such tragedies in the future? Should there be stricter policies against racial profiling, or perhaps more community involvement in policing? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below, and we'll be there to engage with you and explore these important questions further. As the community continued to grapple with the aftermath of the sheriff's daughter's death, the focus turned to the legal proceedings against the officers involved. The case was complex, with many layers of accountability to untangle. The officers claimed they had acted according to protocol, but evidence suggested otherwise. The delay in allowing Dr. Maya Thompson to reach the hospital was deemed a critical factor in the tragic outcome. The prosecution argued that racial bias had clearly influenced the officers' actions, pointing to a pattern of similar incidents in the past. They presented data showing that African American medical professionals were disproportionately stopped and questioned by law enforcement in the area. This wasn't just about individual officers. It was about a systemic problem that had been allowed to persist. The trial was highly publicized, with many watching to see if justice would be served. The community was divided, with some calling for harsh penalties for the officers, while others argued that they were simply following orders. The sheriff, who had initially defended his team, eventually came to realize that change was necessary. He testified against his own officers, acknowledging that racial bias had played a role in the tragedy. The verdict was a turning point. The officers were found guilty of negligence and racial profiling, and they faced significant penalties. The ruling sent a strong message that racism in law enforcement would no longer be tolerated. But while justice had been served in this case, many knew that the real work was just beginning. The sheriff's department underwent a major overhaul. New training programs were implemented to address racial bias, and community policing initiatives were launched to rebuild trust. The sheriff himself became an advocate for reform, speaking nationally about the need for change within law enforcement. Yet, despite these efforts, challenges remained. Some officers resisted the new policies, feeling that they were being unfairly targeted. The community remained skeptical, wondering if these changes would truly lead to lasting improvements. It was clear that healing and rebuilding would take time. Now, we'd love to hear your thoughts on how law enforcement can effectively address racial bias. Should there be more emphasis on community engagement, or perhaps stricter accountability measures? Share your insights in the comments below, and we'll continue the conversation there. As the years passed, the small town began to see the fruits of its labor. The sheriff's department, once a symbol of mistrust, was slowly transforming into a beacon of hope. The new training programs were showing results, with a significant decrease in racial profiling incidents. Community policing initiatives had helped bridge the gap between law enforcement and residents, fostering a sense of mutual respect and understanding. The sheriff, who had once been at the center of controversy, was now hailed as a leader in police reform. He traveled the country, sharing his story and advocating for systemic change. His personal tragedy had become a catalyst for broader transformation, inspiring other departments to follow suit. Dr. Maya Thompson, the doctor who was stopped that fateful day, had also become a key figure in the community. She worked closely with the sheriff's department to develop training programs that emphasized cultural sensitivity and awareness. Her involvement helped ensure that the lessons learned from the tragedy were not forgotten. However, despite these strides, challenges persisted. Some community members felt that progress was too slow, that more needed to be done to address the deep-seated issues of racism. Others worried that the reforms might not be sustainable, that old habits could resurface if vigilance waned. The case of the sheriff's daughter had sparked a national conversation about racism in law enforcement, but it also highlighted the complexity of solving these problems. It wasn't just about changing policies or training officers. It was about shifting cultural attitudes and societal norms. As the town looked to the future, it was clear that the journey ahead would be long and difficult. But there was hope. The tragedy had brought the community together, fostering a sense of unity and purpose. People were talking, sharing their stories, and listening to each other's perspectives. It was a small step, but it was a start. Now, we want to hear from you. What do you think is the most important step in addressing systemic racism in law enforcement? Should it be through policy changes, community engagement, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts and ideas in the comments below, and let's continue this important conversation together.